One time in middle school, I got passed a note during history class, and the note said, "Will you go out with me?" Check one, yes, no. I checked yes. And that, my friend, has made all the difference. Truth to be told, I was terrified of this girl. Not because there was anything wrong with this girl, just she was a lot more grown up than me. And if you can picture like little tiny me, but way smaller yet and horrified and in middle school, then you can get a picture of how, like, you know, an actual middle school girl who looks like a woman, I just wouldn't know what to do. And I didn't know what to do. And she kept wanting to make out with me. And I kept being like, I don't have a plan for that. I there wasn't YouTube yet, so I had no resources on this. And as a result, I think she was unhappy with our relationship that she regarded as prudish. Now, I would like to take a moment to reap all of the Christian cred that you're trying to throw my way. And I bet many of you are pausing this video right now to turn and look at the youngster sitting next to you to say, and that gentleman on that Bible program, he conducted himself right because he is a good Christian. False! I just didn't know what to do. And she scared me. Not sure I've totally figured out what to do yet. So a few weeks later in history class, she sent me a note that said, "Will you break up with me?" Check one, yes or yes. I took the hint and I went home, I took the note, and I tore it up into teeny tiny little pieces and tried to flush it down the toilet. Clogged it a couple times, then I unclogged the toilet, and then I cried in the bathroom until my parents came and asked me, and I made sure that it was loud enough that they could hear me, so they would come and ask me, so then I could shriek at them like I'd seen kids do on after-school specials. Like, nothing's wrong, I hate school and I never want to go back! And then I slammed the door dramatically, and then my dad was like, "You're grounded, you can't act like that." And I cleaned up my act, and the next day I went back to school and everything was fine forever, and I moved on. I might not have been the best at dealing with rejection, that is fair, but I got one thing right, and that I just got on with life. And as I think about what it is for me to deal with rejection, I can't help but consider what it must feel like for God as we go through the book of Acts to constantly get rejected by people. And not even as nicely as that girl rejected me. I mean meanly rejected. I mean, like, you send a note in the form of a guy to say like, "Hey, I like you, I'm interested in you," and then they stone the note. That is screwed up. And that's what's been going on here. Yet we see a God who keeps persisting and keeps sending his people, who are also very persistent, to pursue groups of people who, for the most part, don't seem particularly interested and even get kind of murdery about it. And that is the kind of story we're going to be looking at yet again in Acts chapter 14, verses 8 through 20. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Here we go. In the last episode, we looked at the third stop on Paul's first missionary journey, and it started off good, like most of these do, and then it turned bad, like most of these do. And as a result, Paul and Barnabas had to flee before they got stoned to death by angry religious leaders. So now they're into another neighboring community called Lystra, and we'll see that this story starts with a bang. Verse 8. In Lystra there sat a man crippled in his feet who was lame from birth and had never walked. Verse 9. He listened to Paul as he was speaking, and Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, 10, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." And at that the man jumped up and began to walk. Well, like I said, this starts out as quite the event. And actually, this is very reminiscent of a miracle that happened very early in the book of Acts with Peter and John at Solomon's colonnade, which is part of the temple in Jerusalem. You remember this one? There's a crippled guy. He's been laying there since forever. He has to be laid there because he can't even pull himself to a place to beg. And along come these guys, and in the name of Jesus, they heal him, and he gets up, and he's excited, and he's dancing around. And then Peter gives this big speech to explain what just happened. And that's kind of the key difference, is Peter has a chance to really point to Jesus and clearly explain this. But in Lystra, things are going to play out a little bit differently, and we pick that up in verse 11. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." What? Whoa, that's really, really close. I mean, like that close to what Paul and Barnabas are actually trying to communicate, right? Because their message is, we've got this God who's the maker of all things, God of Abraham, God of everyone, and all along he's promised that there would be this redemption that would come in the form of what we call a Messiah. And guess what? He just showed up, and he was Jesus, and he was here, and then he died, and then he came back to life, but he was the Son of God, God in the flesh. Whoa, this is a great opportunity. What this means is the people of Lycaonia, which admittedly is a little bit more superstitious, blue-collar kind of town, have a context for this, And it looks like the gospel, the message about Jesus, is just going to fit lock and key with some things they already assume about how the world works. Exciting. But verse 12 says, Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bowls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. Abort, 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 red alert. No, hold up. We were right there, but this is not going to work. Now we're into crisis time. You remember the spot in Return of the Jedi when the Ewoks were all worshiping C-3PO? And I guess in the plot there, it kind of made sense for him to go along with it. But here, it's idolatry. You just can't go along with this. It doesn't make any sense. Paul and Barnabas are trying to point to God. Instead, they're being acknowledged as gods, and not even the God they're trying to point to. They're being acknowledged as the gods of a system that is in really conflict with the system that points to the God of Abraham and the one true God. I think what's unfolding here gives us a little bit of insight as to what's going on with Paul and Barnabas, as to what's going on with this crowd, and as to what's going on with God. On the Paul and Barnabas side, you got to commend them for not going along with this. And we'll get into more of how they don't in just a minute. But they constantly get flogged and beaten and stuff. How refreshing would it be to have people want to burn meat for them? I don't know about you, but I love toasted grilled meat. I'd take a bunch of that maybe and just go with this for a couple days and kind of break it to them easy. These guys aren't even tempted by that. They're not going there. And so it says a lot about how altruistic they are in their commitment to what the point of all of this exercise is. In terms of the crowd, it says a tremendous amount about them. They're desperate. They are chomping at the bit for something that is true and real, and they get their first little glimpse of something that smacks of the supernatural and the eternal and the transcendent, and they're not even patient enough to wait to hear what this means and how it works. They just cram it into a context that works for them and anoint the whole thing as being ordained and important and how we do stuff now. It's almost the exact opposite of the response that we saw in Iconium, if you think about it. There the crowd is like, yeah, miracles, laws of time and space. It's interesting that you can break those, but I'm still suspicious. Here, they just go hog wild over the thing. Again, I think out of a desperation that maybe at times you and I can even relate to. They're longing for the supernatural and for what Paul and Barnabas are trying to tell them about. And third, there's stuff to glean about God from the way that this is unfolding. This is a God who's in the process of being rejected again. He's getting rejected in really creative ways. His servants get beat up. People don't like this version of him, but they're interested in like a little partial version of him. And now here he does something to reach out to these people who he made and who he loves. And they respond by worshiping fake made-up gods that pretty much nobody even believed in anymore at this point. Yet, we see a God who, well, there's this much more Bible left, continues to persist. So we're firing up the grill to do some sacrificing to the living embodiment of Zeus and Hermes, and here's what Paul and Barnabas have to say about that. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We too are only men, humans, just like you. We're bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he left all nations to go their own way, yet he's not left himself without testimony. He's shown kindness by giving you rain from the heavens and crops in their season. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." But even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. So again, it's not like Paul and Barnabas are eager to just harvest this stuff. They're shutting this down with the "nay, we are but men" speech as fast as they can. And I think the language that they employ here is really smart. They're saying, hey, look, we might not understand this, and you might not know what God you're even talking about, but the deities you imagine have this name are actually this singular God. And he provides all the stuff that sustains your life and makes life work. And so if you want to sacrifice to somebody who has it coming, like, we can help you out with that. And you can sacrifice to the right God, or better yet, just give him the sacrifice that he wants, which is you and your willingness to follow him. So this situation in general is already crazy volatile. It sits on the knife's edge. You could tip this way or that way at any moment. And along comes somebody to make sure that they flick that in the direction of chaos and destruction. Verse 19. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. Oh, they stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. I was watching some highlights of the GOP debate the other night, and Donald Trump is up there saying things about this and that. And the crowd is really excited about one of his remarks, and then he makes a remark like 15 seconds later, and they booed him with great fervor. I thought, you know what, that's kind of a likably fickle crowd. At least they have opinions and are willing to express them. You want to see an unlikably fickle crowd? How about this one? That just like 2 sentences ago, we're trying to offer sacrifices to these people and hail them as gods, and now we're going to hit them with rocks until they appear dead. This beating must have been serious if Paul looked dead enough for everybody to walk away and call it good. Just like with Stephen, this was completely illegal. Rome has the authority to kill people in a certain manner, but these people don't have authority to carry out capital punishment. This is mob crazy, kill the beast, hit things with rocks, go nuts, and then do it with such a large group of people that you just hope Rome can't do anything to break it up, and you leave the guy for dead and you get on with your day, disperse into the crowd. This was insanity. If this happened in your town, it would be the biggest news in the history of your town. Well, maybe there are some towns, but it would be big news. Now, some people think Paul actually died and was resurrected here. It's possible. I think Luke probably would have mentioned that. My guess is that he was just beat up badly, lost consciousness, and when he received some care, he was resuscitated, and even in a banged up state, was able to get back into town, get Barnabas, and hobble out of town back to Derbe. If Paul was a source that Luke depended on to write this part of the story, it makes sense to me that Paul wouldn't actually know whether he was dead or not. So it would also make sense to me then that Luke wouldn't know which way to exactly record this. But that debate to me is not the big exciting take-home of this passage. The big exciting take-home of this passage is that that dude got stoned to the edge of death at minimum, and then as soon as he woke up, he just got up and went back to work. This guy is nuts. No, that's not nice. He wasn't nuts. He was just absolutely committed to this because, again, I can't emphasize enough, Paul was convinced, as were these other disciples, beyond the shadow of any doubt, to the point of being willing to die for it, that all of this was true, every last bit of it. Here's a few observations. First of all, the pattern thing. You've been warned, there's a pattern here, it's going to keep coming, but I think the pattern repeats itself to drive home an important point. What pattern? Well, big picture, this is the pattern. God does something beautiful, people reject it, then God goes ahead and does what he was going to do that's beautiful and redemptive anyway. And in a way, that pattern isn't really just the pattern of the book of Acts or these missionary journeys. It's kind of the pattern of the whole Bible and maybe just everything, period. God builds something beautiful, say like, I don't know, existence and creation, and then people reject it because they wanted a different way than what God had in mind. And then God decides, I'll redeem that and we'll still just have it be awesome anyway. The Jesus thing, same deal. God does something beautiful and redemptive. People aren't really in the mood, so they go ahead and kill what God was doing. And then God says, okay, noted. I'm going to go ahead and go do that beautiful redemptive thing anyway. Fair warning, I'm about to get a tiny bit sappy on you. I think we see that same pattern repeated also in a lot of our own lives. God does something beautiful by making a person and setting out good things and redemptive things to happen in the life of that person. People like maybe you and like maybe me push back on that, even reject it. We don't want what God wants to do with this life. And then God decides to do something redemptive and good with that anyway. It's easy to get hung up on the screwed up part of that story, the middle stage of that pattern. But I think the final stage of that pattern is really the take home here. God is into redemption. He is going to redeem things. He's going to continue to provide opportunities for redemption, whether we're talking the big picture story of humanity or my life. Observation number 2. In Iconium, in the last passage, we see a brush with the depravity of humankind. I mean, they intended to do violence and bad things. But here in Lystra, we get the full force of the depravity of humankind. We get the idolatry thing, which looks a lot like what was going on with the Israelites in the desert wandering, when Moses goes up to get the 10 Commandments and they're busy worshiping a golden calf and behaving very, very badly down below. We get the same kind of mentality here. I mean, there's even the bowl that's involved in the thing. So I think it's supposed to be a little bit reminiscent. And that in and of itself, you could just say, well, maybe that's bad. Depending on your perspective, maybe who cares? Maybe it's all just made up and you worship whatever you want. But I think we can all agree that it's pretty messed up to do what happens after that. Basically, a mob gets riled up and decides to just kill some people without a trial. That's depraved. That's evil. There isn't really a circumstance where that is good or orderly or right. At the very, very worst, you should at least take something like that to trial and have the proper authorities mediate between these two parties and determine if some kind of punishment is merited. But this is insanity and this is darkness. And the whole reason that there is a gospel and there is a message of redemption is in response to these tendencies that humans have. Final observation is also what I said in the introduction. We are looking at the story of a God who continues to reach out to a screwed up world, even at great personal expense. And that screwed up world responds a little bit and also rejects a lot. And that rejection is often violent. Yet God, rather than freaking out and panicking or curling up and crying because his feelings are so badly hurt, just presses on. And he found people who were willing to follow him with that same degree of intensity. People who were willing to go with him to that very, very difficult place of saying, I put this out of my mind, I wash my hands, I accept that I have some new scars and bumps and bruises now, and I'm moving on to keep doing this thing because it's right. God persists in his love for humankind and his desire to see this redemptive plan seen through. And that is really a theme that we're going to see repeated again and again about the character of God throughout the whole Bible and the rest of the book of Acts. So what does this mean for the modern reader? Well, a couple things. If you're somebody like me who would say, yeah, I don't necessarily get it all, I'm not an expert or anything, but yeah, I think I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm into that. This attitude of God and what we see here should be an encouragement to us. God takes heart and persists. Paul takes heart and persists. Sometimes it's hard to be a Christian, hard to know what to do next. Sometimes it's because people are mean to us. Sometimes it's because we're idiots and we screw it up. Either way, we can imitate this example and say, all right, take heart and persist, even when it's very difficult. If you're somebody who's coming at this from a position of non-belief, saying, I don't buy into any of that, I still think there's encouragement to be found, because if there's something to this book and to the God who is purportedly behind it, it's a God who is interested in you and who is persisting in pursuing you and showing love and grace and redemption toward you, whether it's something you're into yet or not. A couple of things. We're doing the series on Acts. Thank you for being a part of it. If you're just catching up and you're feeling overwhelmed by how much we've already done and how much you've missed, you can go back and watch them all, which is what I would recommend. Or you can pick up a little short intro summary episode that I did a couple episodes back, catch up on everything really fast, and you'll be right up to where we are right now. We do a bunch of other things with the channel, including a series called Matt Whitman Ruins Treasured Verses of the Bible. That's sponsored by offthepage.com. We've partnered up and I'm crazy about what they're doing. I'm also crazy about the fact that they sponsor this show. If you like what's going on here, one thing that you can do to communicate that and to support me is to support them. So again, offthepage.com and my series associated with that. I'll have a couple of links over here. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. We will do a bunch more of this soon. Take care.